Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So in this video we'll talk about soil investigation, and the topic of our video is selection of boreholes and their depth, how we select the number of boreholes and their depth. So let's start. For a rough estimate using Sauer's and Sauer equation for a light steel or narrow concrete building, you can use this equation to predict the depth of the borehole. For example, Z is the depth, B stands for borehole, then 10 into S power raised to the power 0.7. S is number of stories. Let's say if number of stories are 2, you will have to put the value of 2 here, and then it will give, this equation will give the depth of the borehole in feet. If you want to measure the depth of the borehole in meters, then you will use this equation. So using this equation you can predict the depth of the borehole. Then if the building is of heavy steel or white concrete, then you can use this equation. Similarly, you can estimate the depth of the borehole. Then there are some general guidelines before performing the soil investigations. You need to consider these points very carefully. For example, the number of boreholes should be adequate to detect the variation of soil. If the location of load zone, footprint of the structure are known, you should consider the drilling at least one borehole at the location of the heaviest load. So one borehole should be below the heaviest load. So as a guide, minimum of 3 boreholes should be drilled for a building area of about 250 meters square. For a building area of 250 meters square, 3 boreholes should be drilled, and 5 for a building area of 1000 meters square. Then in incompressible soils such as clays, the boring should penetrate to at least between 1 and 3 times the width of the proposed foundation below the depth of embedment, or until the stress increment due to the heaviest foundation load is less than 10%, whichever is greater. So if, let's say, if the width of the building is width of the foundation is 2 meter, then the boring should penetrate up to 6 meter. Similarly, in very stiff clays and dense coarse grained soils, boring should penetrate 5 meter to 6 meter to prove that the thickness of stratum is adequate. Borings should penetrate at least 3 meter into the rock. If rock is encountered, then the boring should be penetrate up to 3 meter into the rock. Boring must penetrate below any fills or very soft deposits. So borings should extend below the soft or fill material. Then the minimum depth of borehole should be 6 meter unless bedrock or very dense material is encountered. Then you can see some guidelines regarding the number of boreholes with respect to the area of the building. If the area of the building is less than 100, then the minimum number of boreholes should be 3. If the area is 1000 meters square, then minimum number of boreholes should be 5. Similarly, if area of the building is 10,000 meters square, then the minimum number of boreholes should be 10. Then there are some guidelines regarding the minimum number of boreholes and minimum depth of the foundation. For a shallow foundation, the minimum number of boreholes should be 1, and the boreholes should be placed at node points along the grid of sizes varying from 15 into 15 to 14 to 40. And the minimum depth should be 1B to 3B, as I explained earlier. B here is the width foundation, the assumed width foundation, and it depends upon the experience. Then for the pile foundations, same as shallow foundation, and the minimum depth of boring should be 25 meter to 30 meter. And if bedrock is encountered, then you need to penetrate up to 3 meter. For a bridge, if it is abutment, then minimum number of boreholes should be 2, and if it piers, then minimum number of boreholes should be 2. And the minimum depth guidelines are same as given above for the pile foundation. Then for the retaining walls, it depends upon the length. If length of the retaining wall is less than 30 meter, then the minimum number of boreholes should be 1, and if it is greater than 30 meter, then 1 borehole for every 30 meter length, or 1 to 2 times the height of the wall. Similarly, 1 to 2 times the wall height should be the minimum depth for the retaining wall. And same, if bedrock is encountered, then drilling should penetrate up to 3 meter. And for the cut slopes along the length of the slope, 1 for every 60 meter length, 1 minimum borehole for every 60 meter length. Then the depth should, for the depth, 6 meter below the bottom of the cut slope. And similarly, embankments including roadways, highway, motorway, etc., 1 borehole for every 60 meter. And the minimum depth should be the greater of 2 multiplied by height, or 6 meters. So these are some guidelines regarding the selection of number of boreholes and their depth. So I hope you like the video. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe and share. And Allah Hafiz.